African National Congress, ANC, South African political party and black nationalist organization. Founded in 1912 as the South African Native National Congress, it had as its main goal the maintenance of voting rights for Coloureds, persons of mixed race, and black Africans in Cape Province. It was renamed the African National Congress in 1923. From the 1940s it spearheaded the fight to eliminate apartheid, the official South African policy of racial separation and discrimination. The ANC was banned from 1960 to 1990 by the white South African government. During these 3 decades it operated underground and outside South African territory. The ban was lifted in 1990, and Nelson Mandela, the president of the ANC, was elected in 1994 to head South Africa's first multi-ethnic government. It originated as a liberation movement known for its opposition to apartheid and has governed the country since 1994, when the first post-apartheid election resulted in Nelson Mandela being elected as president of South Africa. Cyril Ramaphosa, the incumbent national president, has served as president of the ANC since December 18, 2017. Founded on January 8, 1912 in Bloemfontein as the South African Native National Congress, the organization was formed to agitate for the rights of black South Africans. When the National Party government came to power in 1948, the ANC's central purpose became to oppose the new government's policy of institutionalist apartheid. To this end, its methods and means of organization shifted, its adoption of the techniques of mass politics, and the swelling of its membership, culminated in the defiance campaign of civil disobedience in 1952-53. The ANC was banned by the South African government between April 1960, shortly after the Sharpeville massacre, and February 1990. During this period, despite periodic attempts to revive its domestic political underground, the ANC was forced into exile by increasing state repression, which saw many of its leaders imprisoned on Robben Island. Headquartered in Lusaka, Zambia, the exiled ANC dedicated much of its attention to a campaign of sabotage and guerrilla warfare against the apartheid state, carried out under its military wing, Umkhonto we Sizwe, which was founded in 1961 in partnership with the South African Communist Party, SACP. The ANC was condemned as a terrorist organization by the governments of South Africa, the United States, and the United Kingdom. However, it positioned itself as a key player in the negotiations to end apartheid, which began in earnest after the ban was repealed in 1990. In the post-apartheid era, the ANC continues to identify itself foremost as a liberation movement, although it is also a registered political party. Partly due to its tripartite alliance with the South African Communist Party, SACP, and the Congress of South African Trade Unions, it has retained a comfortable electoral majority at the national level and in most provinces, and has provided each of South Africa's 5 presidents since 1994. South Africa is considered a dominant party state. However, the ANC's electoral majority has declined consistently since 2004, and in the most recent elections, the 2021 local elections, its share of the national vote dropped below 50% for the first time ever. Over the last decade, the party has been embroiled in a number of controversies, particularly relating to widespread allegations of political corruption among its members. A successor of the Cape Colony's Imbumba Yamanyama organization, the ANC was founded as the South African Native National Congress in Bloemfontein on January 8, 1912, and was renamed the African National Congress in 1923. Pixley Ka-Isaka Seme, Sol Plaatje, John Dube, and Walter Rubusana founded the organization, who, like much of the ANC's early membership, were from the conservative, educated, and religious professional classes of black South African society. Although they would not take part, Xhosa chiefs would show huge support for the organization. As a result, King John Jalieswe donated 50 cows to during its founding. Around 1920, in a partial shift away from its early focus on the politics of petitioning, the ANC developed a program of passive resistance directed primarily at the expansion and entrenchment of past laws. When Josiah Gum took over as ANC president in 1927, he advocated for a strategy of mass mobilization and cooperation with the Communist Party, but was voted out of office in 1930 and replaced with the traditionalist Seme, whose leadership saw the ANC's influence wane. In the 1940s, Alfred Bideny Summer revived some of Gum's programs, assisted by a surge in trade union activity and by the formation in 1944 of the left-wing ANC Youth League under a new generation of activists, among them Walter Sisulu, Nelson Mandela, and Oliver Tambo. After the National Party was elected into government in 1948 on a platform of apartheid, entailing the further institutionalization of racial segregation, this new generation pushed for a program of action which explicitly advocated African nationalism and led the ANC, for the first time, to the sustained use of mass mobilization techniques like strikes, stayaways, and boycotts. This culminated in the 1952-53 Defiance Campaign, a campaign of mass civil disobedience organized by the ANC, the Indian Congress, and the Colored Franchise Action Council in protest of 6 apartheid laws. The ANC's membership swelled. In June 1955, it was one of the groups represented at the Multiracial Congress of the People in Kliptown, Soweto, which ratified the Freedom Charter, from then onwards a fundamental document in the anti-apartheid struggle. The charter was the basis of the enduring Congress alliance, but was also used as a pretext to prosecute hundreds of activists, among them most of the ANC's leadership, in the treason trial. Before the trial was concluded, the Sharpeville massacre occurred on March 21, 1960. In the aftermath, the ANC was banned by the South African government. It was not unbanned until February 1990, almost 3 decades later. After its banning in April 1960, the ANC was driven underground, a process hastened by a barrage of government banning orders, by an escalation of state repression, and by the imprisonment of senior ANC leaders pursuant to the Rivonia Trial and Little Rivonia Trial. From around 1963, the ANC effectively abandoned much of even its underground presence inside South Africa and operated almost entirely from its external mission, with headquarters first in Morogoro, Tanzania, and later in Lusaka, Zambia. For the entirety of its time in exile, the ANC was led by Tambo, first de facto, with President Albert Luthuli under house arrest in Zululand, then in an acting capacity, after Luthuli's death in 1967, and, finally, officially, after a leadership vote in 1985. Also notable about this period was the extremely close relationship between the ANC and the reconstituted South African Communist Party, SACP, which was also in exile. In 1961, partly in response to the Sharpeville massacre, leaders of the SACP and the ANC formed a military body, Umkhonto we Sizwe, MK, Spear of the Nation, as a vehicle for armed struggle against the apartheid state. Initially, MK was not an official ANC body, nor had it been directly established by the ANC National Executive. It was considered an autonomous organization, until such time as the ANC formally recognized it as its armed wing in October 1962. In the first half of the 1960s, MK was preoccupied with a campaign of sabotage attacks, especially bombings of unoccupied government installations. As the ANC reduced its presence inside South Africa, however, MK cadres were increasingly confined to training camps in Tanzania and neighboring countries, with such exceptions as the Wonki campaign, a momentous military failure. In 1969, Tambo was compelled to call the landmark Morogoro Conference to address the grievances of the rank and file, articulated by Chris Hani in a memorandum which depicted MK's leadership as corrupt and complacent. Although MK's malaise persisted into the 1970s, conditions for armed struggle soon improved considerably, especially after the Soweto uprising of 1976 in South Africa saw thousands of students, inspired by black consciousness ideas, cross the borders to seek military training. MK guerrilla activity inside South Africa increased steadily over this period, with one estimate recording an increase from 23 incidents in 1977 to 136 incidents in 1985. In the latter half of the 1980s, a number of South African civilians were killed in these attacks, a reversal of the ANC's earlier reluctance to incur civilian casualties. Fatal attacks included the 1983 Church Street bombing, the 1985 Amanzimtoti bombing, the 1986 Magoo's Bar bombing, and the 1987 Johannesburg Magistrates Court bombing. Partly in retaliation, the South African Defence Force increasingly crossed the border to target ANC members and ANC bases, as in the 1981 raid on Maputo, 1983 raid on Maputo, and 1985 raid on Gaborone. During this period, MK activities led the governments of Margaret Thatcher and Ronald Reagan to condemn the ANC as a terrorist organization. In fact, neither the ANC nor Mandela were removed from the US terror watch list until 2008. The animosity of Western regimes was partly explained by the Cold War context, and by the considerable amount of support, both financial and technical, that the ANC received from the Soviet Union. From the mid-1980s, as international and internal opposition to apartheid mounted, elements of the ANC began to test the prospects for a negotiated settlement with the South African government, although the prudence of abandoning armed struggle was an extremely controversial topic within the organization. Following preliminary contact between the ANC and representatives of the state, business, and civil society, President F.W. de Klerk announced in February 1990 that the government would unban the ANC and other banned political organizations, and that Mandela would be released from prison. Some ANC leaders returned to South Africa from exile for so-called talks about talks, which led in 1990 and 1991 to a series of bilateral accords with the government establishing a mutual commitment to negotiations. Importantly, the Pretoria Minute of August 1990 included a commitment by the ANC to unilaterally suspend its armed struggle. This made possible the Multi-Party Convention for a Democratic South Africa and later the Multi-Party Negotiating Forum, in which the ANC was regarded as the main representative of the interests of the anti-apartheid movement. However, ongoing political violence, which the ANC attributed to a state-sponsored third force, led to recurrent tensions. Most dramatically, after the Boipatong massacre of June 1992, the ANC announced that it was withdrawing from negotiations indefinitely. It faced further casualties in the Bisho massacre, the Shell House massacre, and in other clashes with state forces and supporters of the Inkatha Freedom Party, IFP. However, once negotiations resumed, they resulted in November 1993 in an interim constitution, which governed South Africa's first democratic elections on April 27, 1994. In the elections, the ANC won an overwhelming 62.65% majority of the vote. Mandela was elected president and formed a coalition government of national unity, which, under the provisions of the interim constitution, also included the National Party and IFP. The ANC has controlled the national government since then. In the post-apartheid era, two significant breakaway groups have been formed by former ANC members. The first is the Congress of the People, founded by Mosi Lekita in 2008 in the aftermath of the Polokwane elective conference, when the ANC declined to re-elect Thabo Mbeki as its president and instead compelled his resignation from the national presidency. The second breakaway is the Economic Freedom Fighters, founded in 2013 after youth leader Julius Malema was expelled from the ANC. Before these, the most important split in the ANC's history occurred in 1959, when Robert Sobukwe led a splinter faction of African nationalists to the new Pan-Africanist Congress. Under the ANC constitution, every member of the ANC belongs to a local branch, and branch members select the organization's policies and leaders. They do so primarily by electing delegates to the National Conference, which is currently convened every 5 years. Between conferences, the organization is led by its 86-member National Executive Committee, which is elected at each conference. The most senior members of the National Executive Committee are the so-called top 6 officials, the ANC president primary among them. A symmetrical process occurs at the sub-national levels. Each of the 9 provincial executive committees and regional executive committees are elected at provincial and regional elective conferences respectively, also attended by branch delegates, and branch officials are elected at branch general meetings. The ANC has 3 leagues, the Women's League, the Youth League and the Veterans League. Under the ANC Constitution, the leagues are autonomous bodies with the scope to devise their own constitutions and policies. For the purpose of national conferences, they are treated somewhat like provinces, with voting delegates and the power to nominate leadership candidates. The ANC is recognized as the leader of a 3-way alliance, known as the Tripartite Alliance, with the SACP and Congress of South African Trade Unions, COSATU. The alliance was formalized in mid-1990, after the ANC was unbanned, but has deeper historical roots. The SACP had worked closely with the ANC in exile, and COSATU had aligned itself with the Freedom Charter and Congress Alliance in 1987. The membership and leadership of the 3 organizations has traditionally overlapped significantly. The alliance constitutes a de facto electoral coalition. The SACP and COSATU do not contest in government elections, but field candidates through the ANC, hold senior positions in the ANC, and influence party policy. However, the SACP, in particular, has frequently threatened to field its own candidates, and in 2017 it did so for the first time, running against the ANC in by-elections in the Metsi-Mahalo municipality, Free State. Under South Africa's closed-list proportional representation electoral system, parties have immense power in selecting candidates for legislative bodies. The ANC's internal candidates election process is overseen by so-called list committees and tends to involve a degree of broad democratic participation, especially at the local level, where ANC branches vote to nominate candidates for the local government elections. Between 2003 and 2008, the ANC also gained a significant number of members through the controversial floor crossing process, which occurred especially at the local level. The leaders of the executive in each sphere of government, the president, the provincial premiers, and the mayors, are indirectly elected after each election. In practice, the selection of ANC candidates for these positions is highly centralist, with the ANC caucus voting together to elect a pre-decided candidate. Although the ANC does not always announce whom its caucuses intend to elect, the National Assembly has thus far always elected the ANC president as the national president. The ANC has adhered to a formal policy of cadre deployment since 1985. In the post-apartheid era, the policy includes but is not exhausted by selection of candidates for elections and government positions. It also entails that the central organization deploys ANC members to various other strategic positions in the party, state, and economy. The post-apartheid ANC continues to identify itself foremost as a liberation movement, pursuing the complete liberation of the country from all forms of discrimination and national oppression. It also continues to claim the Freedom Charter of 1955 as the basic policy document of the ANC. However, as NEC member Jeremy Cronin noted in 2007, the various broad principles of the Freedom Charter have been given different interpretations, and emphasized to differing extents, by different groups within the organization. Nonetheless, some basic commonalities are visible in the policy and ideological preferences of the organization's mainstream. The ANC is committed to the ideal of non-racialism and to opposing any form of racial, tribalistic, or ethnic exclusivism or chauvinism. The 1969 Morogoro Conference committed the ANC to a national democratic revolution which, destroying the existing social and economic relationship, will bring with it a correction of the historical injustices perpetrated against the indigenous majority and thus lay the basis for a new, and deeper internationalist, approach. For the movement's intellectuals, the concept of the National Democratic Revolution, NDR, was a means of reconciling the anti-apartheid and anti-colonial project with a second goal, that of establishing domestic and international socialism. The ANC is a member of the Socialist International, and its close partner the SACP traditionally conceives itself as a vanguard party. Specifically, and as implied by the 1969 document, NDR doctrine entails that the transformation of the domestic political system, national struggle, in Joe Slovo's phrase, is a precondition for a socialist revolution, class struggle. The concept remained important to ANC intellectuals and strategists after the end of apartheid. Indeed, the pursuit of the NDR is one of the primary objectives of the ANC as set out in its constitution. As with the Freedom Charter, the ambiguity of the NDR has allowed it to bear varying interpretations. For example, whereas SACP theorists tend to emphasize the anti-capitalist character of the NDR, some ANC policymakers have construed it as implying the empowerment of the black majority even within a market capitalist scheme. The logo of the ANC incorporates a spear and shield, symbolizing the historical and ongoing struggle, armed and otherwise, against colonialism and racial oppression, and a wheel, which is borrowed from the 1955 Congress of the People campaign and therefore symbolizes a united and non-racial movement for freedom and equality. The logo uses the same colors as the ANC flag, which comprises 3 horizontal stripes of equal width in black, green and gold. The black symbolizes the native people of South Africa, the green represents the land of South Africa, and the gold represents the country's mineral and other natural wealth. The black, green, and gold tricolour also appeared on the flag of the KwaZulu-Bantustan and appears on the flag of the ANC's rival, the IFP, and all 3 colors appear in the post-apartheid South African national flag. The most prominent corruption case involving the ANC relates to a series of bribes paid to companies involved in the ongoing R55 billion arms deal saga, which resulted in a long-term jail sentence to then-Deputy President Jacob Zuma's legal advisor Shabar Sheikh. Zuma, the former South African president, was charged with fraud, bribery, and corruption in the arms deal, but the charges were subsequently withdrawn by the National Prosecuting Authority of South Africa due to their delay in prosecution. The ANC has also been criticized for its subsequent abolition of the Scorpions, the multidisciplinary agency that investigated and prosecuted organized crime and corruption, and was heavily involved in the investigation into Zuma and Sheikh. Tony Yengini, in his position as Chief Whip of the ANC and head of the Parliament's Defence Committee, has recently been named as being involved in bribing the German company the Syncrup over the purchase of 4 corvettes for the SANDF. Other recent corruption issues include the sexual misconduct and criminal charges of Beaufort West municipal manager Truman Prince, and the Oilgate scandal, in which millions of rand in funds from a state-owned company were funneled into ANC coffers. The ANC has also been accused of using government and civil society to fight its political battles against opposition parties such as the Democratic Alliance. The result has been a number of complaints and allegations that none of the political parties truly represent the interests of the poor. This has resulted in the No Land, No House, No Vote campaign, which became very prominent during elections. In 2018, the New York Times reported on the killings of ANC corruption whistleblowers. During an address on October 28, 2021, former President Thabo Mbeki commented on the history of corruption within the ANC. He reflected that Mandela had already warned in 1997 that the ANC was attracting individuals who viewed the party as a route to power and self-enrichment. He added that the ANC leadership did not know how to deal with this problem. During a lecture on December 10, Mbeki reiterated concerns about careerists within the party, and stressed the need to purge itself of such members. In late 2011, the ANC was heavily criticized over the passage of the Protection of State Information Bill, which opponents claimed would improperly restrict the freedom of the press. Opposition to the bill included otherwise ANC-aligned groups such as COSATU. Notably, Nelson Mandela and other Nobel laureates Nadine Gordimer, Archbishop Desmond Tutu, and F.W. de Klerk have expressed disappointment with the bill for not meeting standards of constitutionality and aspirations for freedom of information and expression. Thank you for watching this video.